Friends, in the course of history of Indian sculpture, now we have already entered into the modern era, and in the 32nd module we are going to discuss the Bengal School. In this module, the Bengal School of Art has been introduced and its entire historical development has been looked at. Along with socio-political historical background, the role of art historical writing of that time has been looked at and analyzed. Important among these are E.B. Havel, Anand Kumar Swami and Stella Creminis. Abanindranath Tagore also supplemented it with his writings on Indian aesthetics. After this, we look at the artist and the body of work produced by them. Early art historical writing creates an extremely metaphysical picture for all of Indian art and philosophy, which gets deeply embedded in the minds of people. The approach of some of these people who had a great influence has been studied and analyzed. It can also be seen that the approach of Rabindranath Tagore changes eventually, and he moves towards internationalism and attempts at creating a world university instead of a nationalist one. He comes to critique the idea of nationalism not just in case of India but also Japanese nationalism. In the last phase, we look at two events in Bengal extremely tragically ruthless. There are calamities created by mankind, the Bengal famine and the Tabaka Moment. The Bengal School is known to be revivalist, and it is here for the first time that Indian artists tried to create a new distinct language for Indian art. Ancient and medieval Indian art traditions, which were almost lost to the world, by this time were discovered, researched and studied for inspiration. The aim was to create a new indigenous art with its root in the Indian heritage, as opposed to Victorian academic realism as taught in the art schools of that time. The Tagores played an extremely important role in the creation of this school. Abanindranath Tagore, 1871 to 1951, headed the art movement. This new movement was initially called Navya Bharata Shilpa, or the New Indian Art. They held many exhibitions across the country and one in Paris in 1914. They finally settled down at Shantiniketan, where Abanindranath headed the art school. If you see the early beginnings, the art school was established at Calcutta in 1854 as a private enterprise by few distinguished Indians and British company officers. H.H. Locke was invited from England to be the first principal. In 1896, Havel took over the Calcutta School. Before this, he had served at the Madras School of Art for a decade. E.B. Havel, 1861 to 1934. Havel was an English art historian and art administrator. He initially served as superintendent at Madras School of Art, after which he headed Government College of Art, Calcutta. He wrote much on Indian art, and Abanindranath Tagore was influenced by his ideas and writings. The two interacted much, and Havel insisted on Tagore to search for Indian language in his visual art. Significant among his works is Ideals of Indian Art. Ratan Parimu writes, in the Ideals of Indian Art, he wrote, Indian art is not concerned with the conscious striving after beauty as a thing worth to be sought after for its own sake. Its main endeavor is always directed towards the realization of an idea, reaching through the finite to the infinite. And that throughout Indian art and throughout the Christian art of the Middle Ages, we find the central idea that the beauty is inherent in spirit and not in matter. He added further, the whole spirit of Indian thought is symbolized in the conception of the Buddha sitting on his lotus throne, calm, impassive, his thoughts freed from all worldly passion and desires, and with both mind and body raised above all intellectual and physical strife. Yet, filled with more than human power, derived from perfect communion with the source of all truth, all knowledge and all strength. It is the antithesis of the spirit which comes not by wrestling nor by intellectual striving, but by the gift of God, by prayer and meditation, by yoga, union and with the universal soul. Havel's interpretation of Indian art and his own theories of art intermingled in the following passages. The true aim of the artist is not to extract beauty from nature, but to reveal the life within life, the noumena within phenomenon, and the reality within unreality, and the soul without matter. When this is revealed, beauty reveals itself. So all nature is beautiful for us, if only we can realize the divine idea within us. Havel created a very spiritual and divine image for all Indian arts and artists, and in this he was supported by many others including Kumar Swami, Vivekananda and Aurobindo Ghosh among others. This created images for all Indian art and philosophy, with its overemphasized Orientalist lineage, took such strong hold on the mind of Westerners and even Indian scholarship that its effect can still be felt today, quite strongly in fact. Shantiniketan is the center of all this activity. Shantiniketan was founded by Rabindranath Tagore in 1901 as a school of art colony. Rabindranath aimed at internationalism while also trying to create an ideal educational environmental inspiration, of which were taken from India's ancient past. Therefore, classes were held out in the open among trees and nature. His nephew Abanindranath Tagore looked at India's courtly art for inspiration. Nandalal Bose was the student of Abanindranath from the first batch of students, who eventually began teaching at Shantiniketan. He also became the principal of Kala Bhavan. Bose's student was K.G. Subramaniam. The beginning of 20th century was marked by the Swadeshi movement in India. In 1907, the Indian Society of Oriental Art was founded in Calcutta with the intention of looking for and promoting Indian art. Political struggle against colonial rule was on a rise and Indian National Congress was founded in 1885. Ravi Verma's art had gained much popularity. The Tagore brothers, however, eventually began searching for an alternate style for Indian past. The years of 1904 and 5 are also marked by the attempts at dividing Bengal by Viceroy Lord Curzon. This was resisted with boycott of British goods. In the discovery of Ajanta painting, a new Indian alternative was found which the Tagores had been searching for. Abanindranath's students accompanied him to Ajanta to study these. Apart from this, miniature painting, Chinese and Japanese art were also looked into. This period is also the time when academic interest rose in Indian text and aesthetics. E.B. Havel wrote on Indian art in his work, The Ideal of Indian Art. Anand Kentish Kumar Swami, from 1877 to 1947, born in Sri Lanka, was among the first to write on Indian aesthetics and sculpture. He interpreted ancient Indian literature and wrote extensively on art, aesthetics, society and philosophy. His writings were extremely well received and influenced Abanindranath Tagore and Nandalal Bose among others. Kumar Swami was also an art collector and curator at Boston Museum of Fine Arts. A major part of his collection is presently with that museum. As has been mentioned, he saw all Indian art as a representation of divinity. His writings clearly display his Orientalist and metaphysical views and treats ancient Indian literature, particularly Vedic corpus, as the unique creation of mankind. He was no doubt a man of extreme academic caliber, and the sheer amount of writing left by him is huge. However, his position on Indian art is the same from beginning to end, that of eulogizing and perceiving ancient Indian as the most perfect and pure that the world could ever witness. It may be noted here that apart from a visit to Shantiniketan, Kumar Swami did not really live in India ever, and therefore did not witness the suffering and ground reality of the majority here. Not surprisingly, therefore, he never gets critical of anything about India and does not talk about the evils of caste and gender. It may be mentioned that even Vivekananda, whose audience was primarily the Westerners, is documented to have eulogized the practice of sati, that is widow burning, by saying that an Indian woman cheerfully walks into the funeral pyre of her dead husband. Ratan Parimu in his writing quotes him. According to him, individualism in art was hardly possible, as the craftsman is not an individual expressing individual whims, but a part of the universe given expression to the ideals of its own internal beauty and unchanging law. And that patterns are things which live and grow and which no man can create. All he can do is to use them and let them grow. Ratan Parimu also quotes Aurobindo Ghosh. Aurobindo says that it will be the highest and the most perfect art which, while satisfying the physical requirement of the aesthetic sense, the laws of formal beauty, the emotional demand of humanity, the portrayal of life and outward reality, as the best European art satisfies these requirements, reaches beyond them and expresses the inner spiritual truth, the deeper, not obvious reality of things, the joy of God in the world and its beauty, the desirableness and the manifestation of divine force and energy in phenomenal creation. Kakuzu Okakura was a Japanese thinker and a connoisseur who played an important part in nationalization of Japanese art. He seems to have visited twice. His first visit was in 1890s and second may have been around 1902. But this is yet debatable. He authored the book Ideals of the East, the foreword of which was written by Sister Nivedita. He too pleaded a return to the roots of one's heritage and unity among Asian countries to fight Western powers. Ratan Parimu quotes him. He pledged not only to return to our own past ideal, but also to revivify the dormant life of the old Asiatic unity becomes our mission, and exhorted the task of Asia today then becomes that of practicing and restoring Asiatic modes. But to do this, she must herself first recognize and develop consciousness of those modes. For the shadows of the past are the promise of the future. No tree can be greater than the power that is in the seed. Life lies ever in the return to self. Giving the example of his own country, he explained it was some degree of this self-recognition that remade Japan and enabled her to weather the storm under which so much of the Oriental world went down. And it must be a renewal of the same self-consciousness that shall bind up Asia against into her ancient steadfastness and strength. Stella Creminis, 1896 to 1993, was an American art historian who studied at Vienna School and was invited by Rabindranath Tagore to teach at Shantiniketan. She specialized in Indian art and aesthetics, and her work Indian sculpture was the first of its kind to appear at that time. She later taught at University of Pennsylvania, invited by Norman Brown, and was also curator at Philadelphia Museum of Art. Creminis brought a new way of looking at Indian art and especially Indian sculpture. Her observation in her book Indian Sculpture are muses, honest reactions to the visuals. It was an entirely fresh piece of writing and it can still be interpreted in newer ways. Unlike other scholars, Kumar Swami, she did not get into overtones of divinity and spirituality, but focused more on the formal aspects and the emotive elements as conveyed by the sculptors. On spirituality and realism, Parimu says that it is important that the concluding remarks made by him in this ongoing debate are considered over here. He says, realism is not entirely absent from Indian tradition, though the spiritualists would have us believe otherwise. The problem of representation is not philosophical but is rightly now analyzed in visual and psychological terms. Visual representation excites all human beings. It excited the Indian as it did the Western mind. The Indian excesses in the illusionistic technique resulted in either the aversion for them by many artists of the 20th century from revivalists onwards, providing them with a permanent disavowal, and secondly, the tendency for searching new means of pictorial representation. Revivalist attitude is in art echoed the nationalistic manifestation in politics and at social level. Even if these were absolute and extreme ideals, they could not be so in actual practice. Thus, even if synthesis was either advocated or resisted, synthesis in actual fact was taking place as an inevitable consequence. Synthesis as political, social and cultural level is also observable at the level of art. Abanindranath, Gaganendranath and Rabindranath each had a very strong personality, subscribing to his own attitudes. In spite of this, synthesis is also involved in their work. Confrontation with the West and the resultant synthesis thus is a feature both socially and culturally and had to be accepted as an inevitable aspect of the 20th century Indian art. If we talk about the artists who were involved in this movement, after Abanindranath, it was Nandalal Bose who was asked to take over as the head of Kala Bhavan. This set off to create an art movement which has long-lasting effect. He encouraged the learning of as many skills and techniques as possible in his students and appreciated exploration. Various crafts and skills were introduced, public art projects were taken up by students and various walls were filled with murals. This made the whole school and in fact that space a gallery open to explorations. Art historian R. Shivakumar says, the educational program Nandalal planned for Kala Bhavan took care to include many of the values that were dear Rabindranath during the post-Swadeshi phase. Nandalal himself was sympathetic to these, and one of the major achievements of Shantiniketan was to effect a shift from the notion of cultural identity based on invariable national essence to a notion of historical authenticity based on environmental response and contextual relevance. This helped artists like Vinod Bihari Mukherjee and Ramkinkar Baij to do away with historicist themes and stylization. Rabindranath later became quite critical of ideas of nationalism, but Nandalal Bose remained committed to the nationalist struggle. Nandalal made conscious attempt at collecting and learning traditional Indian techniques and skills which were dying out due to neglect. He wanted to preserve traditional processes and make them available for contemporary artists. Rabindranath's approach became increasingly international and he wanted to move beyond all boundaries. In Shivakumar's words, as a creative individual, Rabindranath did not have a fixed perception of art. Even while he was trying to draw the attention of Indian artists to Asian art tradition, he was familiarizing himself with the development in modern Western art during his visit to Europe and America. His 1916 visit to Japan and America marks a turning point. On the other hand, he was taking a close analytical look at the Japanese art and recommending its lessons to Indian artists. On the other hand, he was arising his critique of Japanese nationalism and nationalism at large to his Japanese and American audiences. Alongside, he was beginning to visualize an internationalism based on human understanding and cross-cultural assimilation as a corrective to this. He wrote, "The most significant fact of modern days is this, that the West has met the East. And for this momentous meeting to be fruitful, the East and the West," he argued, "should join hands in comradeship." The world was strengthened his conviction, and in 1920-21 he transformed the Shantiniketan school into Vishwa Bharati, an international university where, to quote its motto, the whole world meets in one nest. Binod Bihari Mukherjee and Ramkinkar Baij were Nandalal students. Ramkinkar emerged as an artist with unique intervention in several ways. His choice of material, cement and concrete, was almost revolutionary. Cement had been used before by artists, but never in such a radical way. Shivakumar makes the following observation. Ramkinkar, like Nandalal and Binod Bihari, was also versatile and eclectic by choice. This came naturally to him. Working rather intuitive, he was less systematic than Binod Bihari in his eclecticism. He was also more impressionable. In his early years, academic realism and wash painting, and later socialist realism, post-cubist idioms would coexisted in his work. The stylistic diversity that characterized his oeuvre and the non-linearity on his evolution may appear confusing and irrational, but they also suggest that Ramkinkar did not see modernism as a sequence of movements, but as a set of alternate openings towards creative freedom. He was borrowing from Western art precisely as modern Western artists were borrowing from other traditions, linking discrete periods, styles or oeuvres through the affinities uncovered by his own sensibility. As we have seen, Ramkinkar did not share Nandalal's and Binod Bihari's enthusiasm for Far Eastern art. Modern Western art, from Rodin and the Impressionist to Caesar to post-cubist, and pre and post-classical Indian art were his main points of reference. The art styles he was drawn to, both traditional and modern, for all their idiomatic differences, express physical dynamism, as do his work, whether they are representational or abstract. While Nandalal and the Shantiniketan artists at large tried to make their art socially relevant by giving it a functional orientation, Ramkinkar, taking a different path, began to explore social relations in his work. The experience of the man-made famine of 1943 and the Second World War gave the political commitments as unmistakably leftist orientation. Already an admirer of Bernard Shaw, Maxim Gorky and Russian realists, his themes now become more explicitly social and political. In the mid-1940s, we see him turning away from the optical and formal concerns of modernism towards an allegorical representation of social reality. From the specificity of the local towards the symbolism of the universe. The expressionist strain that Binod Bihari sublimated in his mature years, Ramkinkar allowed to grow and to flourish. And the romantic celebration of tribal life turned into an ideological valorization of the proletarian body. These shifts made Ramkinkar's late works more accessible, acceptable to the later artists and viewers. This accessibility is sometimes used to project him as an alien within the Shantiniketan ethos, as one who is closer to Indian artists of the post-independent period. Ramkinkar has been discussed in the next module. Shanku Chaudhary, that is 1916 to 206. Chaudhary was one of the most well-known students of Ramkinkar Baij. He left Shantiniketan and joined Baroda as a senior faculty. Though one of the most significant products of Shantiniketan, his career mainly flourished in Baroda, and therefore he has been discussed further in the next module. Sharbari Roy Chaudhary, 1933 to 2012, Chaudhary, one of the celebrated teachers of Shantiniketan, is appreciated for his extremely sensitive portraits that he has made. Being extremely interested in music, he chose to portray some of the stalwarts of Indian music like Bade Ghulam Ali, Kesarbai Kerkar, Siddheshwari Devi, among others. These sculptures are considered as landmark in portrait sculpture in India. Balbir Khatt was born in 1939. Khatt was a disciple of Ram Kinkar Baij. Though he was one of the most accomplished sculptors of India, he was also respected as an academician, a thinker, an orator, and an art activist. He used to work in unusually large size and mainly in stone. Janak Jhankar Najri, born in 1948, and K.S. Radhakrishnan, born in 1956, are also among the significant products of Shantiniketan and were the students of Baij. Janak Jhankar began thinking in terms of exploring space in 1972. Invariably, a minuscule human figure was placed somewhere in the center, which at once gave a scale to the whole ensemble, turning it into a vast environmental complex. While the solitary human figures placed in the center may give the effect of dissolution, as in the sculpture of Giacometti, they also assume an eerie quality of being withdrawn into themselves in the way they are placed in the setting. The Shantiniketan sculptors have significantly contributed to the development of modern art in India. The Calcutta Group, 1943 to 1953. This is the time when artists in Kolkata began to feel limited by the process of only looking towards Indian tradition for their practice. Opposition emerged to the nationalist progressives because of its limiting nature of visual arts. Artisans again began to look at European art movements. A new group called Young Artists Union was formed in 1931, which held its major exhibition at Calcutta Town Hall. This was a short-lived group, after which emerged Art Rebel Center in 1933. In their catalogues, they stated their aim as anti-sentimentalism, which referred to Bengal School's romanticism, and also rejected academic realism in practice. This collective too, however, did not last long. With this background and major socio-political events like Second World War and man-made Bengal famine, the Calcutta Group emerged. In this group, a first exhibition in 1954, the following artists participated: Pradosh Dasgupta, Kamala Dasgupta, Vidya-mitra, Nirod Majumdar, Paritosh Sen, Pran Krishna Pal, Gopal Ghosh, and Subho Thakur. This group did not remain constant in the coming year, and different artists eventually took a more personal journey. The Bengal famine and the Tabaka Moment. The Bengal famine of 1943 happened during the Second World War. Millions of people died in Bengal due to malnutrition, starvation, and disease. It has been observed that the cause of this and a series of other famines to affect India were the result of conditions created by political powers and were driven by motives of monetary benefits. Tabaka Moment rose in 1946 in Bengal. This was a peasant movement initiated by the Kisan Sabha, the peasant front of Communist Party of India, CPI. At that time, peasants would till the land of which did not belong to them. They were tenants essentially and were supposed to give half of their produce to the owner of the land. Tabaka means sharing by third. The movement demanded that the peasants would give only 1/3 of the produce from land instead of half. Therefore, the movement was called Tabaka Moment. It was also demanded that the crop be stored in the godowns of the farmers and not the landlords before division. Many artists of Bengal reacted to these two events in their artwork. Somnath Kaur, Zainul Abedin, Chittoprasad Bhattacharya were some of these artists. They worked with printmaking techniques and paintings. Somnath Kaur also made sculptures in clay and bronze.